Hi, everyone. My name is Yo-Yo, and I work with the Blueprint Career Services team here at the School of Continuing Studies. I have the pleasure and the privilege of hosting this Blueprint Industry Insights conversation here today, where I'll be chatting with our panelists about factors impacting the world of work and how you can utilize these insights in your own career development journey. Blueprint Career Services is a new offering here at the school created to work alongside you as you design your career path to the future you envision for your career, wherever that journey might take you. And this new offering will provide diverse programming ranging from panel sessions such as this one today, to cohort-based series, to strengths-focused coaching sessions and workshops, and an online portal with articles and templates to tackle the practical aspects of your career development. You can create an account on the Blueprint portal where we will continue to add more events and resources as we go along. So it is my pleasure, and I know that many of you signed up for this session using the Blueprint portal, so you're pretty familiar. But before we get started, I'd actually like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I'd also like to acknowledge, given the fact that we are in a virtual space, that you might be joining us from many different places, near and far, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands as well. So it is now my pleasure to welcome our panelists for today. I'm here with John Barnshaw, Mary Stacy, and Joseph Ogilvie. Joseph might be having a few technical issues getting on, but once he hops on, it'll be our pleasure to have the conversation with him as well. In the meantime, I'm just going to quickly introduce the panelists with their bios and hop into the discussion and start asking some questions. So I'll start off with Mary Stacy. Mary Stacy is the founder of Context Consulting. She works internationally with leadership teams to increase their effectiveness in the midst of escalating complexity. She's known for delivering high-impact people and change strategies that evolve leadership cultures and align capabilities with business needs. She's also an executive coach working with leaders who are committed to leadership as a lifelong journey. So very excited to have a chat with you, Mary, as well. John Barnshaw is the Vice President for Education Success at Lightcast, a global leader in labor market insights. Dr. Barnshaw leads a team that partners with more than 1,000 colleges and universities in North America and 200 education partners. In his role as vice president, he's responsible for increasing the usage of solutions that help reimagine student success and deliver career insights. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you as well. And finally, last but not least, Joseph Ogilvie. Joseph Ogilvie is the founding principal at Archangel Ventures Incorporated, an innovation advisory practice focused on real estate development and construction. He's also the head of innovation partnerships at the Brookfield Center for Real Estate and Infrastructure at Schulich School of Business and director of applied research in the center's Urban Lab. His work focuses on innovating for the transition to net zero emissions and solving the housing supply challenges that plague urban environments. A longtime award-winning instructor at U of T SCS, Joe brings real-world insights and a passion for coaching and mentoring to support learners who want to leverage project management to create impact, spur growth, and innovation in their organizations. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to have the conversation. Carla, if you don't mind actually turning off the PowerPoint so we can see the faces. I know everyone's here to really see the face and make sure that this is conversational. So I've prepared some questions ahead of time for our panelists today to begin the conversation. But you will see on your screen, so to all the attendees in the room, you'll see on your screen the option to submit questions using the Q&A function. So if you look on the bottom there, you'll see that. You're welcome to submit your questions during the moderated part of this event, and I will allow ample time for panelists to answer some questions as well. So please submit the questions as you're going through, and we'll have a look and see what questions have come in. All right, I'm just going to do a quick check-in with Carla. Is Joseph able to get in still? No luck. It looks
Not yet. I've just sent him the invitation now, so I'm hoping he can.
okay. I see.
join right now.
Okay, awesome. I see him in the attendees.
Yeah.
If you can just connect with him over email, just to with the email address we have on file, just to make sure he's able to get on the panelist list.
Perfect.
Thank you. All right. So I'm just going to start us off on our questions here. To get us started, we just heard your bios about what you currently do. I have a question about if this is what you've always wanted to do, and how did you determine this was the direction you wanted to go? And I will ask Mary to go first.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you from Toronto, which is where I live. I would have to say that while I'm very delighted to be working in the way that I am now in my career, it really has evolved in quite unpredictable ways. And some, I can think about actually that I'm kind of in the fifth iteration or on the fifth path. I started in the nonprofit sector, moved into academia, jumped over to the corporate sector, and now I'm kind of an entrepreneur traveling in all of those places. There's a poem by American poet William Stafford that's, that starts out, there's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. And I think that I really believe that if we each kind of find our thread, we hold it, we allow it to thicken and brighten through our careers, it will guide us. And this has allowed me to really weather some very difficult times. I've been fired, and easier times where I've moved, I wanted to expand or move toward an opportunity. For me, the thread has always been human development. So teaching as a professor, coaching business leaders, working with leadership teams as their culture, this thread can be woven in any of those places.
Thank you. I'm interested to hear how that, and I'm sure through the questions that'll come up, but even just with, it seems like you were able to identify where your strengths are and how you can kind of take that along in your career, whether that is through being fired or a layoff and things like that, but still being able to weave that into where you directed your career as you grew. So I'm excited to dive more into that and hear more of your insights on that. I'll pass it over to John.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, and thank you very much for the opportunity to connect with you all today. I wanted to be the right fielder for the Chicago Cubs, and since that didn't work out for me, then I had to go to Plan B. And that was a great experience to kind of learn and work in professional baseball. And then I went to college, and then I really, really loved college. I became a faculty member, and then my research kind of led me into higher education research. And I kind of agree with Mary that my pathway was maybe perhaps a lot like yours that are here in the webinar, and certainly like Mary's, where there's a thread that kind of runs throughout. And I've thought a lot about like, well, how did you get from point A to point B? I think it's important to tie a narrative around that. So for me, it was always research and impact, whether it was doing disaster research to have a better understanding of how we can help those that are vulnerable, or it was doing higher education research to understand who's at risk, to my work now, which is helping students figure out what their career should be based on data and insights. So I've drawn upon a lot of the insights I've learned over a long period of time, but I do think that there's a thread that if you're not happy with where you are, there's an opportunity for you to upskill, and this is one of those moments that we're in where there's tremendous potential moving forward. So I'll turn it back over to you, Yo-Yo, and it looks like Joe has been able to join us, so that's great.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Joe. Perfect timing, because I just asked the first question. So I'm going to throw you on the spot, but it's actually interesting to hear the point you made, John, about really being able to tell your story and almost make a brand for yourself, weaving together where your career go, whether that's with a pivot or with going along and progressing in your career, but being able to really make sure that you're able to weave a common interest or story or brand for yourself. Yeah, so excited to dive into that a little bit later as well. And Joe, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry
Happy
about
to be here.
technical issues. I'm gonna say the question again so you know what question I've asked.
Uh-huh.
And then again, I'll let you settle in for the rest of the conversation. So we read your bios and we've heard your bios, and we're interested in if this is something you always wanted to do, or how you determined what direction you wanted to go.
It's something I've always wanted to do, but it took me 40 years to get there. So a bit of a meandering route to get here. I did applied physics and engineering in university, and then went to work in Silicon Valley in a very soulless job that I did not like, but had the perk of great travel and account management responsibilities all over Europe and North America. And then, oddly enough, it was the 2009 sort of Great Recession downturn that sort of catapulted me onto the path that I have been on, that has gotten me to where I am now. So a bit of a circuitous route. I decided in 2009 that I was going to change careers and that I was going to become an architect. You know, I had been an engineer, but I had always loved architecture because of the very tangible, long-lasting outputs that come from that sort of work. You know, the way our cities evolve, the way our lives unfold, is often shaped by our built environment and buildings. But I was just, you know, I thought that architecture was this profession that was going to go away because of computers and, you know, doing a lot of the heavy lifting and so on. So anyway, I started down that road through sort of leveraging my engineering background into green building and design and so on. And then that sort of evolved over time, working with some big builders, but always sort of on the innovation side of things. And so that's sort of put me into teaching, working with industry partners, working with academia, now doing applied research and leading my own innovation advisory practice. So my world now is all coalesced around the built environment and innovation, and it feels really good to be here. It's very, very exciting times to be working in this field. And so, yeah, it only took me 40 years to get here.
It's 40, no big deal. But it's actually interesting you talk about the fact that you had a career pivot after almost a forced change, really, and being forced to reflect on where it was you wanted to go and things like that, which is something that we find learners talk about, being interested in a career pivot since the pandemic. Now I'm reevaluating what my career looks like and how I decide where it is I want to go. So actually with that, I want to throw this to John. Based on your experiences and your observations of the labor market, future of work, what are key trends you think we should be looking into or attendees should be aware of? And have any of these surprised you at all? What are some key trends?
Well, I would say a couple of the key trends are that we're in this moment where probably in the next year, we will be headed into a recession. Historically, that means that there's this what's called a counter-cyclical relationship between education and work, that a lot of times when it gets to be a tough labor market, people say, well, I need more skills to make myself more competitive, so I'll go back to college or university to learn more skills and things like that. What's unique about the moment that I think we're going to be headed into is that the labor market in North America is at some of the lowest points in the last 50 years. So there's not a lot of available labor out there. So particularly in the United States where I live, this has been an opportunity and a challenge for employers that we haven't formally entered the recession because there hasn't been layoffs because there's so much shortage of labor. So the fields, people ask me all the time related to that question, where are the opportunities? There are 4 fields that over the next 10 years that Lightcast, the data that I've looked at and analyzed, that are going to be in demand, that are high growth fields and high earning potential fields. And those are broadly defined as information security, computer science, data science, so you can think about business programs, business analytics, things like that, and then the health sciences. Those fields will be growing. And if you're like me and you say, well, I've got a background in the social sciences, I'm not sure how that helps me, or I've got a background in the businesses, sit tight, we can talk about that, because there's great opportunities for you to join those fields because of the labor market. There's a shortage of people that have those degrees that are aligned. And in a lot of times I talk to hirers and employers, and they say, well, I will take people that know how to ask the right questions, and I can align to meet my needs. I can train them on data science. I know data science because I'm a data scientist, but what I struggle is the social skills to hire. So we can talk more about that on how to be more competitive in those areas. Even if you're not degree aligned, you can certainly become skill aligned.
Absolutely. And that's really the importance of those transferable skills. And I know, Jill, you're really big on practicality. So as a follow-up to that question, what do you think are some practical skills or experiences participants should engage in as they navigate their career progression through these trends, whether they see themselves clearly represented in these trends or whether they might be nervous about those? What do you say are some practical skills?
Yeah, I think the point about the cyclicality of the economy is it sort of, I think there's an analogy around skills to do with that. Economies boom and then they bust because of variety of forces. But I think that whenever there is that boom and then bust, there is this sort of decompression that happens. And usually the resetting mechanism is a return to fundamentals. So I think that at an individual level, focus on the fundamental skills that have sort of gotten you to where you are now. If you're someone who works in an analytical role, or if you write code, or if you're a comm specialist, those skills that have served you well and that have gotten you to where you are, I think it's important to double down on those, like become even, sharper with those fundamental core skills that are marketable, and then add to that, layer on top of that. But don't just abandon the things that have sort of put you in good stead, provided that you are in good stead. I think you've got to be able to become more productive. Like productivity is how we work our way out of these cycles. So becoming more proficient, more competent by sharpening those fundamental skills is really important. And then adding on to those, icing on the cake, with new perspectives, new skills that allow you to create or enhance your own personal value proposition is sort of, what I'm telling people to do.
It really sounds like in order to do that, you also have to have a level of self-awareness about what your strengths are and where you need to maybe round out a little bit, but really a focus on self-awareness and being able to identify that to help you propel. And that's really an important starting point. It's understanding yourself, understanding your strengths, and then now what do I do with that to navigate it?
Yeah.
And for some people, the idea of identifying oneself or knowing where to start can be scary. Even the idea of failure and changes might be scary, especially as we go through seeing these ongoing news cycles of inflation and layoffs, and it can be overwhelming for some. And so maybe I'll throw this to you first, Mary, but I'd love all of your insights. What strategies have you used in moments of uncertainty or fear or overwhelm when it comes to the changes? And how do you suggest attendees here use this to navigate their own career growth?
Coincidentally, we started a new course last night in the strategic leadership program at U of T. And our kind of foundation setting was talking about the acronym that some may have heard about, that we live in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And that, really, we all need to come to a kind of confident understanding that uncertainty just is. It's the water we swim in. And we all know that if we're parents and We all know that if we've been on an adventure vacation, that we just don't know moment to moment, even though we would love to believe. And so in my own experience and in my experience working with teams, I really have needed through my career to understand that I will reach the limits of my capacity. I will start to feel a lack of confidence. I will a sense of anxiety, perhaps at certain times, limitations, and that those are natural learning opportunities. Those are places, you know, they become places for me to stop and pay attention to what it is I might be, the territory I might be entering, the things I might be needing to learn. And I think that you're pointing at self-awareness. I think that in an ever-changing and uncertain world, we need to really focus in first, always, and allow that to be in calibration with what's going on in the outer world. And I have found that if I focus on the and space, that in uncertainty, my competence and my capacity, my technical skills, and my ability to adapt, my ability to move forward as an individual and to connect in the collective. Those are all, you know, those and spaces, I think, really kind of broaden my repertoire, expand my ability to navigate uncertainty.
That's a very great way to say it, the and space, you know, and it also, like you said, it does allow you to be a bit more hopeful about what you can also direct and feel like you have agency in that. Yeah, very good insight. I'll throw it over to you, John. What strategies would you
Yeah, I
say?
think when a lot of people have anxiety about the labor market or am I going to have a job and those kinds of things, one of the best things that you can do is you can align to where the skills are. Kind of the idea of, like, Wayne Gretzky used to always say, you skate to the puck, or you actually skate not to the puck, but where the puck's going to be. And so there's a couple things that you can do in a very practical way to figure out where the high growth fields are, where they're in demand. Develop those data literacy skills. There's a lot of great online content in data literacy that's free that you can learn and become data fluid. Almost every position in the next 10 years is going to require some level of data fluency and understanding data literacy. Highlight those in-demand social skills. I talk to employers a lot, and they talk about the specific hard skills that they need in a position, but equally, if not more important, there's a lot of research that now indicates the most in-demand skills are those social skills, where, as somebody at Accenture, a Fortune 100 company, told me recently, like, listen, people have the quantitative skills, but when I put them in a room, they either talk past the client or they talk down to the client. So I can't put them in the room anymore. So being able to be fluent in data is important, but also being able to have a good understanding of who you're talking to and how you're engaging. Third thing is certificates and additional training. You all are here at the University of Toronto today because you believe in continuing studies. That is something I tell everyone to do. And it's great that you're here there learning about continuing studies, about your particular things that if you're early career, if you're mid-career trying to pivot, you can do it. You're in the right place now. So that should give you some confidence right now that you're doing the most important things you can do. The final thing I'll add is high impact practices. So in the United States, we've studied that a lot. It's a practicum, it's an internship, it's a project that lasts longer than a semester. Those are the kinds of things that give you that kind of real world experience, which is important, but I would argue equally important is that you are developing work products that you can demonstrate to somebody that is in a corporate environment or a nonprofit environment that says, this is work products that I have created through my prior work. That's not just some sort of academic exercise, but it has real world value. And that is something employers like to see, and it gives you a competitive advantage over other people. So hopefully learning those skills, working towards those skills can help you become more competitive and reduce some of your anxiety about what might lie ahead for you.
Really good. Thank you. All right. And last but not least, Joe.
Yeah, navigating uncertainty. Like Mary said, you know, it's the story of our life. The idea of stability and security is an illusion that we become comfortable with. But ultimately, whatever security and stability that we feel, the most sustainable and durable form of that comes from within. So I think that investing in knowing and understanding yourself, you know, finding out what your strengths, your weaknesses are, and really becoming clear about who you are is perhaps the one thing that you can do that is within your control that will metaphysically situate you to navigate whatever uncertainty comes, right? Whether that is turmoil in the labor markets, whether that is disruption of your family life, loss of loved ones, finding a way to ground yourself is key. You know, you can begin to do other sort of pursue other external things well only after you've been able to sort of ground yourself well. You know, you can start busying yourself and distracting yourself with pursuing internships and taking courses. But if you don't know why you're doing that, if you don't have some sort of internal locus of control that anchors that action, you can find yourself just becoming busy for the sake of being busy and running into a tailspin. So for me, I like to write and do journal reflections after I've had a really great conversation, or maybe I've taken a class or attended a lecture or watched a YouTube video, whatever it is. I've had some time to think about that and it's added something. I like to write these things down, and I'll show you, I keep a pocket-sized little journal, and I just, you know, I try to make a journal entry whenever something comes up, and maybe it's a page or two, but you know, it doesn't have to be with any sort of regularity or frequency. But I think that committing sort of your thoughts and ideas to paper and making that something that you can refer to over time and look back and see your growth and progression has been hugely stabilizing for me. And I think that that's what you want during uncertainty, times of uncertainty. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. And the idea of grounding oneself, because then it's like your starting point. You can always go back to your why and that understanding of yourself before you start taking on specific actions.
Yeah.
Starting with your why and understanding what that is can actually help direct in the moments of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really good insight. Mary, I actually have a question for you. I know you work with leaders and you've had a lot of experience working with leaders, and I'm sure you've seen it all the way from leaders navigating the 2008 financial crisis and the impacts of that. What would you suggest leaders and aspiring leaders take into consideration as they actually navigate the trends of work?
I think that what's come up here from both Joe and John is this kind of keeping our eye on the kind of central core, and that is what's essential as humans, right? That we, in the face of, you know, the technology and the direction it's going, artificial intelligence, what are the human capabilities that we need to preserve and to grow individually and within our organizations? And I think that we're in the midst of really a tectonic shift in leadership, where we've been, you know, my mother used to say, we're all doing our best. That was her guiding principle. Everybody's just doing their best. And we all collectively have been doing our best, living the legacy of the industrial era, organizing in ways top down with command and control leadership. And we're so aware now that with climate change and geopolitical conflicts and pandemics, there's something shifting, and it's affecting leadership in a great, you know, in a great way. What we're needing to do is move toward what I'll call regenerative leadership, away from the kind of management and leadership that is about extracting from human resources that is about exploiting people's capabilities and performance. And we need to think now about embodying what regenerative leadership calls living system principles. Can we work in uncertainty with what's emerging? Can we lead more as if we're in a forest than a machine? Can we understand the basic principle, and that I'll distill down to the 3 letters A, B, C, always be connecting, because that's what the natural world does. We're moving into a time that is really valuing the relational dimensions of leadership and organizing and being part of a team. So while the tasks that we're doing are important, one of the teams I worked with used to talk about the relational envelope. You cannot really succeed anymore without, authentically connecting and relating in a very kind of human valuing way. And so I hope that answers your question, but I think that we really need to start connecting what we're doing on a day-to-day basis with some of the biggest questions and challenges we face in our organizations or in those broader systems. If you want me to give a more tangible follow-up, you'll have to ask me another question.
Of course, and actually, when we had a conversation before this, one of the things that I'm hearing from your answer coming through is you had mentioned that leadership transcends trends. It's more than the trends, and it seems like you're really speaking to the importance of the human-centered approach to leadership, because then it does help navigate trends. It does look at the why, and it does look at the center point, like everybody has kind of mentioned in the conversation here as well. So that's what I'm getting from what you're sharing.
Yeah. And then what we talked about was that we really do need to think about a leader in every chair. That leadership is not the preserve of someone up there or out there, but we really need to, with our self-awareness, our ability to be more adaptive in this world we're living in, we all have the ability to influence change and growth and progress.
Absolutely. That's a very, very good point. Yes. Before I ask my next question, and Mary's point kind of led me to that, I do want to remind you that you're welcome to put in questions into the Q&A for the panelists as things are coming up for you. I'll get to those questions shortly. But I do have a question actually about that relational aspect. We often hear the phrase, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And we hear all the time that networking is a fundamental piece of career development. How would you suggest attendees and participants in this call utilize networking as they navigate the ever-evolving trends? And I'll ask you first, John.
Sure. Well, I think it can be both. It's helpful to know things. It's also helpful to know people as well. One of them. So my background and training is in sociology, and one of the most profound insights I think we had in the last 50 years was from a sociologist named Mark Granovetter, who, like many graduate students, thought his data was wrong. He was looking at the question of how do people get their first job, and the conventional wisdom at the time was that, well, you get it from very close affiliations with people, because if I had a deep relationship with Yo-Yo, that I would expect Yo-Yo to get me a job with Mary because they have a strong relationship, and Yo-Yo wouldn't recommend someone she doesn't know that well. Well, being a grad student, he thought he got his data wrong, and he looked at his professor and he said, no, it wasn't human error. These are right. So why is that the case? What we learned is that there's something called the strength of weak ties. That is, friends of friends know more information than you do. My partner and I, we know pretty much all the same people, and I know pretty much what she knows and vice versa. But meeting somebody outside or loosely affiliated with your network, Joseph and I, we've just connected for the first time now. So we have very different networks. I'm sure if we were to continue the conversation, there might be a few people that we know like Yo-Yo together, but there's a whole bunch of people that he could introduce me and I could introduce him to a variety of new opportunities and networks. That's how businesses work. That's how a lot of people get their first jobs. And that's a wonderful opportunity for you to learn about different things from different people. And that's why in higher ed, a lot of times we talk about the importance of diversity, because that brings about those connections where you're exposed to new ideas, new concepts, new people that give you access to new knowledge. And that is how you can really upskill. It's how you can get mentors that know things different than what you might have learned at the beginning of your career. I'm sure Joseph and I would have a great conversation about architecture and engineering. I know a lot less about that than I do sociology. So I always love having conversations with people in different fields, and because that's really how I learn, and hopefully vice versa. So I think networks are really important. It's also important to not be afraid to take that risk. If you don't know somebody that well, reach out, grab a cup of coffee, have a virtual coffee. There's lots of opportunities, particularly in a school of continuing studies.
So John, what I'm hearing is you're asking people to reach out to you on LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. Reach out on LinkedIn, look at people that you see me and you say like, hey, I see that you have a connection at this organization. If you're interested, I'd really be interested in working there. Could you make an introduction, stuff like that? So reach out to me. There aren't not too many John Barnshells on LinkedIn, and as it turns out, we all know each other because we get each other's emails. So so there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's a very strong point about those powers of weak ties. Yeah. Yeah. Mary, you're unmuted. Joe, you're unmuted. Was there anything you wanted to add to that as well?
I think on the business of networking, you know, I think there is, so one of the things that I observed when I moved to Canada from Silicon Valley in 2010, and Silicon Valley is a very diverse place, lots of different cultural groups work together, but socially they kind of stay to their own. I don't know if it's still that way, but when I was there, certainly they don't really integrate that much outside of work. Toronto and the GTA is different. I think Canada has a slightly different ethos that powers it, and there's a lot more integration outside of work. So recognizing that there are some cultural nuances around networking, I think it's important to understand that underpinning networking is this idea of social transactions, right? You go to have an interaction with someone, and you know, meeting superficially and talking about the weather is maybe a fine initial first step. But if there's going to become anything of value that transacts between those two people that are engaged in a conversation, that value needs to be overt and it needs to be clear, right? And so you will see different subtle ways that people start to try to measure the value by asking you questions like, what line of work are you in? What neighborhood do you live in? And these are all ways that people are trying to read what is it that you have to offer. And I think that one of the best things that we can do when we are preparing to go meet someone or going to a networking event is to be clear about what our value propositions are personally. And I'm not saying this in the interest of making you really efficient at extracting an opportunity from your counterparty. I'm saying you need to be clear about what your story is, right? And maybe you'll bump into someone for whom that story doesn't have any resonance, and then you move on to the next person. But maybe you'll bump into someone for whom your story and what you have to offer does have some value and resonance. And then they'll carry that forward. It will stay with them. They will remember it. And maybe you'll get a note in a week or two, or maybe you won't. Maybe it'll be 6 months. I have so many stories that I can tell you about the way that these things come back around, but they only come back around if you had a story that was compelling and memorable and that someone thought, there's some value there. So avoid the sort of superficial, trite interactions with your networking, but be prepared and do some heavy lifting on your own to be clear about what your personal hedgehog is, what your personal value proposition is.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of importance in having it be mutually beneficial, but also, again, something keeps going back to that awareness of self, awareness of what your story is, your strengths, all of those things, and bringing that into relationships to make it authentic versus extremely transactional. And then, one of the things, I can't remember if it was John or Joe who mentioned it, but if nothing comes out of it, that's okay. You move on because that does keep it authentic. And in a year, something might come around, but the importance of really understanding oneself, but having it be mutually beneficial. Yeah. All right, go ahead, Mary. I think I interrupted you as you're about to say something.
No, that's so I think that your network and participation, as you say, in a way that values mutuality in network events is one part of what we would encourage our clients to have. And I would encourage anybody here to think about developing what we call an ecosystem of support for your career development. So networking, absolutely one aspect of that. Also think about mentorship. Also think about having a peer coach, someone who is just an informal and picking up the phone in the moment because I need kind of person, and who's your learning community. And as part of your ecosystem of support, what role does your family and friends play? And all of this contributes to a very kind of organic and resilient system around you and your career development.
That's a very strong point. The family and community sometimes people think of networking and think that they have to, and speaking to the power of weak ties, think that they have to go out and make a whole new group of networks, when it could be your neighbor, it could be the person at the volunteer association you're part of. It could be anyone, but they are there, and being able to tap into that is an important aspect as well. Okay, I do have more questions, but I see a few questions have come in, so I will hold off and probably ask some of my questions as well. But I see a question here. I'll start with the first one I see here. So how do you think the trends we are seeing in the world of work going forward might impact equity deserving groups? And I will ask anyone to answer that first.
I guess I'll jump in first. So the world of work in terms of, I think for a lot of companies so I work with a lot of small companies, but we also work with, I don't know, probably 90 of the top 100 Fortune 500 companies. And they are committed to ESG, and they're committed to diversity in a diverse workforce because they see the value in it, in how that diversity has really matriculated over time in terms of their bottom line, but also in terms of their workforce. On the teams that I lead, diversity is one of the most important things that we look for, because it's so helpful in helping us understand different perspectives and thinking through different processes. So on some level, I think it's encouraging that there's probably never been more of an opportunity, but that opportunity is always under threat. So recognizing that and looking for, the risks in there inherent in anytime you're worried about equity focused organizations, there's always the tendency to retreat to what feels normal. But I'm encouraged by kind of the progress that's been made, but I'm also cautiously optimistic that we have to keep moving forward during difficult times, and we can't go back to what we know of just what feels familiar. We have to go and try different things, focus on hiring diverse talent, hiring things that I had a colleague who said, I'm tired of looking at fit. And I was like, you mean you're tired of making sure people fit like what you put in your job descriptions? And they're like, no, I have a preconceived notion of what fit is, but I want people that are really talented that don't necessarily fit into what I think they can be, because that's how I'm going to get my team to grow. That's how I'm going to get my organization to grow. So that is something that I'm trying to get more people to understand, particularly on the hiring side, that taking a chance on somebody that might not fit in the way that you conventionally think of things is a wonderful opportunity, and it's a challenge for you as a manager. How are you going to make that work? And I think more institutions, more organizations need to be thinking that way.
Yeah, I think I've heard the phrasing, you know, hire for fit is no longer the way to go, because what has fit previously is not necessarily what is beneficial, and that can look like going through the trends of work as it's evolving, but what is fit previously also does have levels of bias to it. And I think if I'm also hearing what's probably important, if you are a member of equity deserving population, how do you identify your value, and not how you fit, but the value in which you might be able to bring in to the organization as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anybody?
I think I'll offer. I think it's a great question. I think it's one that's a little bit hard to answer without sort of understanding the meta narrative of our times. And I think that what we are seeing is we live in a time where Western ideals, Western sort of economic dominance of the world is under duress. And I think that leaders and of Western economies are acutely aware of the growing threat to that supremacy that's coming from the other side of the world. And so there are all of these different ways to try to get people who live in our societies here in the West, North America and Europe, to bring more discretionary effort, time, talent to the jobs that they're in. And so things like diversity, equity, inclusion are doormats, they're gateways that are meant to welcome more of that, just because it's smart and it's necessary now. So I think that, like John said, there's been an unprecedented opening up of opportunity. And I think that that opening up of opportunity to equity deserving groups is there. I think that what equity deserving groups need to do is to go at it hard. Forget some of the narratives that are 5-10 years old. Maybe you grew up with some of these narratives. You have to find a way to put aside any disempowering narrative and just go for it. Go for that open door and lean into it with everything that you have, and you'll be surprised at how far you'll get, because it's kind of like an all hands on deck kind of thing now to sort of help maintain our place, maintain the global world order the way it is. And I think this is sort of the overarching meta narrative that I see playing out in this context.
Mhm. Yeah, just to pick up on that, I think that we are slowly but surely coming to a collective awareness that we need everyone. We need all the perspectives we can bring into the room. And it's important perhaps to hold hope and understand that change often comes sideways. And we can use the pandemic as an example. The recognition that emerged and is continuing to emerge that we have to adapt to welcome diverse needs in the most simplest way. Are people preferring to work at home or come to the office? But that's just one flavor of this, and that those kinds of changes set the foundation for others that are more daunting initially.
Yeah, very, very good point. I think even what you're talking about with diversity in all aspects, whether that's a wide range of it. And a lot of times we have this assumption that, letting you in the door is the first step, but what does inclusion look like? And how do we make sure that all these voices continue to be heard? So the importance of also using your voice and unlearning a few things, as Joe mentioned, is quite important in that pushing of the future of work and having influence in the future of work for equity seeking populations. Okay, another question I see here in the chat. I recently completed 2 continuing ed certificates at UTS School of Continuing Studies. Congratulations. Hoping to move to expand into new but related areas, the one in which I've been working in for years. So this person, they're finding that job postings are asking for real world experience. And the question that they have here is, how do I get real world experience if no one will hire me or allow me to get that experience? It's kind of like the chicken and the egg situation.
Yeah, so I'll take the first crack at that. Angie, you're not alone. That's a lot of people. And I always thought it was inherently unfair because it's like, well, you don't, I want to get experience. That's why I applied for your job. And it's like, well, we can't hire you because you don't have experience. It's like, well, this is a completely defeating process. So what I was talking about a little bit before, if there's opportunities for internships, practicums, doing projects that align, there's our company, we have something called Career Coach that can help you find what skills are in demand. There's another product called Handshake that can help you kind of showcase your skills. So let's say that you have a skill in learning a particular business process, like selling techniques. If you can post some of the presentations or slide decks that you've done, then somebody can look at your resume and they can see that you've kind of done some of that. If you're saying, I have no experience doing something like that, I would talk about framing it in a certain way that might be helpful. So recently I was interviewing somebody who was a school teacher in 9 through 12, and she was interested in working on our team. And I asked her, have you ever managed a book of business? And she said, well, no, but I taught math, so I know how to manage numbers. And she said, I also, I was a yoga instructor, and I didn't know that I was ready. And I thought I was ready for it. And somebody said, no, I don't think you are ready for it. But she said, I took a step back and I learned, and I said, what are the skills that I need to learn to become a great yoga instructor? And she spent 6 months learning those skills. And as a result of that, she said, I become a great yoga instructor and I got the preferred time slots and stuff like that. Well, I hired her for managing a book of business. She's one of the best people we've managed with none of the skills, because the skills that she was telling me is, I have a great work ethic. I've tried something different and it works. And I could see the corollary, and everyone else on our team could, that was hiring. It's like, this person wants to work. They don't have the knowledge yet, but they are willing to earn it and learn it. And that's great. There's a bunch of credentials and certifications out there where if you don't have a background in, let's say, data science or business, whatever it might be, you can take some of those small continuing studies credits or micro credentials, and you can say, listen, I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way. And that's what a lot of times in this labor market where people are short on talent, they're just looking for people that have taken that extra step and are really serious about getting into a field. That shows that you're willing to put in the work. And a lot of hiring managers, as one joked with me recently, well, actually, the fact that you don't know anything is probably a good thing. That way I'll teach it to you the right way. As opposed to, I don't want somebody who's got a head full of trash in there that they think that's how you should run things. So some hiring managers actually just like to hire it. And if you don't know anything, that's great. We'll train you the right way to kind of do stuff. So I hope that's helpful in understanding some of the opportunities out there, even if you're short on the skills and the credentials right now.
Yeah, so it's the transferability of whatever experiences you've had, whether that is through coursework and things like that, being really important there. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say don't worry about what's in the job posting. Don't worry about it. They have to put something in there. And everybody, if they writes those things for their ideal candidates, you're looking for a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a wife, a husband, you make your list, right? Ideally, this is what I would like to have. Sure, make the list. The employers will make the list and they'll put the list up on the job board. But if you think that just because you see something on a list, it disqualifies you or it minimizes your opportunity, then I think that that's a narrative you need to disempower yourself of. Like, you know what strengths you bring to the table. And I think that if you are relying only on, education is a great marker because it indicates that you have interest, you have aptitude, you have some discipline, you've subjected yourself to a strenuous and rigorous course of study. Those things are valuable. But if you think that education is the key that will unlock opportunity, it's not all that you need. And so I would say that if you see an opportunity that's posted and it's local, it's a company here, I would say that maybe you shoot off the resume, but maybe you go over to the office and you walk your resume in and you look someone in the eye and you shake their hand and you talk to them like a person, right? And I think that will do far more for you than worrying about whether or not you have the right experience and then shooting it out into the ether for the algorithms to crush your resume, right? Like there are so many great hires that don't fit the stereotypical bill. So I wouldn't worry about what the job descriptions say. If you like the company, if you like what you know about their brand, their culture, their work environment, if you know people there, and if you like the role, if it's interesting and you think you have something to offer, then you go at it. Simple as that.
If I can jump in real quick, Yo-Yo, because I want to underscore something that was very important that Joseph mentioned, and that is particularly for equity deserving groups and first generation students. My colleagues have done some research and they found that people who look at jobs and they say preference and they go, oh, well, I see on LinkedIn that already 70 people have applied. A lot of times that discourages them from even applying. Apply, because it could be exactly what Joseph said. That's exactly what they're looking for is you. And a bunch of people who are white males that look like me say, oh, well, I could do that even if I don't have the skills. And so I would encourage you've got just as good a shot as anybody when you apply for a job, and you don't know what they're looking for a lot of times. So just apply. If you want the job, then go apply. And great advice too on if it's local, meet some people because many times people hire and it's like, oh, well, after talking to you, you might be a great fit for this job, which you had no idea about until you got there and talked to them. So sorry for interrupting, but that was an excellent point I wanted to underscore.
No problem at all. And Mary, did you have anything to add? I see another question, a few more questions coming in. Go ahead.
The only thing I'll add is that, because I think these were both brilliant responses, is that it can take longer than we wish. And, that reality in different phases of our career is a very real one. And what I would encourage is the kind of perseverance that comes from follow the yes, right? Trust your intuition, constellate your experiences. Someone said earlier, be able to tell your story, have a narrative that will connect. But all our good advice doesn't detract from the fact that it can be hard and it can take longer. And I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's a very good acknowledgement. I think one of the things that it can take longer, and for some people taking that time can also in itself be a privilege. And so sorry to add a point here is that sometimes also the first thing you take doesn't necessarily need to be the final thing you take. So if that's something you take while you're figuring out what it is that your next step should be, then that's okay too. But also having that time in itself can be a privilege. So just to add to that acknowledgement there. Can
I just piggyback on what Mary said and what you said as well?
Absolutely.
No, the answer no is a perfectly reasonable and legitimate answer. Like rejection is legitimate, and that's okay. And I think that no one likes to get rejected. It feels bad, but guess what? It's okay to feel bad. And when it's time to feel bad, feel bad. When it doesn't feel nice, when it sucks, when disappointment is there, embrace, accept it. Like, I think that it's good to feel that sometimes, because it builds character, it builds resilience, it makes you more robust as a person. And that is just a compounding effect internally that will bear dividends and bear fruit for you later on. You know, if you work out and you have a tough session and you feel sore, it's a sign that something is incubating, right? So I would say that if you get rejected, maybe don't just only feel bad. Maybe sit down, think about it, maybe use it as a point to write some reflections down and think about what's the key learning, what's the takeaway, what can you infer from that? How should you perhaps change your approach? Or maybe you don't need to change your approach. But all I'm saying is it's okay to feel bad, you know? So like Mary said, it can take longer. You might get a couple no's, you might get rejected. That's fine. Deal with it.
It's actually funny you talk about the rejection and the no and the value in that sometimes. I think from the stories and the bios we heard of all of you, you've had moments of also your no, or you're being laid off or having to pivot and things like that. And I'm sure in those moments didn't feel that great, but from what I'm hearing from your reflections, it did give you a moment of pause to determine, okay, where do I go next? Or how do I navigate this? Or how to reevaluate what my strengths are, what my core is, what my why is. And in the moment absolutely does not feel fun, but continuing to maybe keep that as a top of mind as well. And speaking of people who go through all types of ups and downs and yeses and nos, the next question actually speaks to what tips do you have for entrepreneurs trying to prepare for the changes and the trends you mentioned?
Go ahead, Joseph.
I'm an entrepreneur. I'm new to it. It's terrifying. That's it. No, I mean, look, so this is a story that's still being written. So I don't have a definitive answer for you just yet, other than to say, it's less about finding product market fit. It's less about building a funnel or a pipeline of customers. And it's more about personal transformation and reckoning with your own identity. You know, an entrepreneur isn't just some kind of what you do, it's kind of who you are. And that's been my discovery so far. Right? That's been my discovery so far. I come from a family of civil servants who believe in, you know, working at one job for 30 years kind of thing, and you go to school and you get a good job. Like, that's the background that I come from. I don't come from a bunch of like an entrepreneurial family where I have lots of examples and have had those conversations and stories around the dinner table. So I'm trying to figure this out. But so far, I can tell you 3 years in, it's really coming to terms with the identity of an entrepreneur as being someone who is comfortable with ambiguity and knowing that planning, while useful as a discipline and knowing how to, almost all plans are going to change. So you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptable, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty and make the most of what happens. You're always planting seeds, you're always sowing, you're just always doing that. And in time, you know, these things, they bear fruit. Yeah.
Go ahead, Mary.
So as someone who has, owned a business, founded a business about 17 years ago and scaled that to work internationally, it has been really important to understand there will be phases, there will be years when the tide is out. There will be peaks and valleys, and it's important to prepare for those, as Joseph has described, from the inside out. It's also important to think about nuancing your business enough so that you can weather the times that are difficult, because they will come, and they'll actually almost come with predictable regularity. So what are the adjacent things that you can innovate into in the slower times? What new certifications can you do as an entrepreneur? How can you reshape your business? What are the kind of multiple lines that will still create coherence and, you know, back to delivering the core value of your business. But that preparation and that ability to be in the volatility and uncertainty of entrepreneurship does begin from within, but can tangibly be addressed on the outside as well.
Yeah, a very important aspect of waves there, like you were mentioning too, because that is the world we're in, and as the future of work, the trends go, they are in waves. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Oh yeah, I was gonna, okay, so there's two different kind of, I guess, angels or demons, depending on your perspective, that are on my shoulder. The one is like the people I work with. My company is owned by a large private equity firm, and they would be like, well, during a recession, what you have to do is you have to focus on your core, the product that you build and the product that you deliver in the market. Focus on that, make sure it's as strong as it can. And to the extent that there's annual recurring revenue, where it's like a membership or something that's consistent, focus on that core ARR. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how do you weather a recession. And Mary's advice is spot on about, well, in addition to that, are there things that are opportunities in this environment that were different in the other environment that can help you? So on that shoulder, that's the practical of it. I think the other thing that it's equally helpful is not too long ago, I was in a session with Marcus Samuelsson, who is a world-renowned chef. He founded Red Rooster, and he was the first chef in the United States to present a meal that was not a French chef before President Obama and President Modi of India. And so state dinners in my country are a very, very big deal. And he was the first chef that was not from a French cuisine background to do it. One of the stories he told me was about mentoring in a small business. And yes, he had mentors that had been French chefs that were more senior than him, that he looked up to and learned much from. But he also mentored people along the way that were also small entrepreneurs that were going through some of the similar things. And he also had mentors that he was bringing along. So people that were junior, but for instance, that had experience on Instagram. He said, I have an Instagram account. A lot of people follow me, but I don't know how it works, but it's very important to my business. So be thinking and looking during those times of like, how can I be mentored in different ways, and how can I mentor other people, which will help my business grow too.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Looking for those opportunities to mentor, grow, all of those kinds of things, and that opportunity piece is something that's important there. Okay, I have one more question in the chat. I'm aware of time, and this might have been touched on a little bit, but I kind of wanted to just bring it to light a little bit. Is the advice or insights you might have for people who either have a gap in their resume, they've taken a leave, and they're looking to re-enter the workforce now or in the near future? How do they navigate this this world of work, and how do they get themselves in there?
For me, I think I'll just say it's about the thread that Mary brought up earlier. So if you were what did you do during that gap, and how are those skills applicable? So if you went back to college, if you were taking care of children or dependents, and what did you learn along the way that might be relevant to the job? And if you can say, well, I don't think any of it's relevant, you can think of that example of a yoga instructor. How does being a yoga instructor help you manage a book of business? It's about a skill set. I also hired another teacher that lesson planning is more or less the same as strategic planning in terms of going through accounts over the course of a year. You have to think months in advance on where you want your students to be. So that's like an opportunity when you're career pivoting to think about the skills that you learned along the way. In my own career and background, I haven't read a book on disaster planning and research in probably 10 years. I did in some of my graduate work, and I published in a lot of that area, but it's still relevant today when I think about strategic planning, when we were going through the strategic planning process about like, what are things that I don't expect to go well? They're not going to go well. So what are some of those risk factors that we can think about? So thinking through the repertoires that you learn in different areas, are directly relevant to what you want to do in the future. You just need to tie that thread together. So for me, I'm always curious in data and insights and where that leads us. And that's that big thread that kind of ties the picture together where people can go, oh yeah, okay, he was doing disasters, now he's doing higher ed stuff. I see the data thread through all that. So it makes sense. It kind of reconciles these seemingly disparate pasts.
Yeah, so that understanding of the story, again, really being able to identify what's the value proposition, like Joe had mentioned too.
Mhm. One of the things I heard recently was that with the ageism that is present in workplaces and career development at this point, it is advisable and acceptable for people of a certain age to drop experiences from the bottom end of their LinkedIn profile or their resume, for example, and then bring those experiences in if they have reached the point of an interview and a conversation. Take that for what you will. I think that what that says to me is, you know, someone used the word brand recently. We do have the opportunity to craft the story. If you've had a gap in your experience, what would you call it from this year to that year? What if you put it on your resume? And what if you identified in tangible terms what you learned during that period, because it included volunteer work and all of a sudden it's legitimized something under a banner. It's a creative opportunity. And we have there's a lot of shame associated with certain things that go on in career development. If we lose our job, we're supposed to be humiliated. If we have a gap in our experience, we're supposed to somehow be ashamed of that. Well, shift, just like you said, Yo-Yo, shift that narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I would ask a question to the questioner, like, why are you worried about that? What is the worry?
I think, and if I have to guess, and then this is where those narratives that and those myths come up of, if you take a gap, that means you need to have professional workplace experience, so you need to have paid work experience for it to count as experience. So I would assume that's where some of that worry might come from.
So what I would say is, one, recognize that a resume is just a flyer. It's just a flyer. And we could have a 90-minute panel on how to hack the resume reading algorithms. We could do a workshop on that alone. That said, if you're relying on your resume and the construction of your resume and a gap showing up in your resume, eliminating you from consideration as a potential candidate for a role, then I think you are perhaps missing sort of a more salient point, which is getting asked to an interview or having an HR phone call screen and then sitting in front of a hiring manager to have a conversation about an opportunity is kind of what you're aiming for. And then the human element always takes over. I think the gap is scary because we think about sort of the cold impersonal systems that screen. But if you sit in front of a person and you can talk about 2 or 3 years or 10 years that you took off from being in the workforce, but you can speak to it like Mary said, this is what happened during those 10 years. It's not going to be as scary as you think it might be, because you're still living, breathing, doing valuable human things during that time. There were lessons that you were learning, and I think it may even provide a point of connection. So don't let it put you off too much. I think that you just learn to package it and speak to it in a forthright manner. And that's probably your best chance for connecting authentically with whoever's sitting across from you.
Yeah, so a really good point about really telling that story and making it a big part of how you present yourself and how you thread everything together. Okay, so we have time for one more question. I'm going to make it a question of my own. I want to ask, because we've heard some of the nervousness about the trends of work and things like that, but to end it off, I'd really like to wrap up to know what are you most excited when it comes to the future of work and the trends that are coming up in the world of work? What's exciting about that?
I would say for me, the thing that's most exciting is the next generation of work. I think Mary and Joseph mentioned a background, his family had a background in civil service, and Mary mentioned about kind of the Industrial Revolution and top down. My father worked at IBM for 30 some years, and his generation, the boomers, were largely that success meant that you had one job. It is likely that over my generation that probably I'm on my third or fourth job because I've chosen things that I thought better aligned to where I wanted to go in life. I might end up at 2 or 3 other jobs over the course of the next 20 years. So over the course, it will not be uncommon that people will have 5 or 6 jobs, which is a sea change from a generation ago. The younger people that I'm speaking to now, the early career people, it is likely that you could have 3 to 6 jobs at one time, in the sense that work might become more fragmented. Some of you were like, well, I have 2 jobs now. I'm an Uber driver and I go to school, and then I'm an intern at school, and then I actually have my full-time job. So I'm really interested in the future of work and credentials. Yeah, so Joseph has 3 now. So that is what's really exciting, because it's fundamentally different than what we've done, like in the history of civilization, right? Like we were hunters and gatherers, we plowed and tilled fields, we worked in plants, and now we're doing multiple things simultaneously. And I'm just really excited about the future of work, because I don't know where it leads, but that's an interesting question for me. So
yeah, so that the almost, as people sometimes might call it, the gig economy is really a thing, but just being able to just have multi-dimensional careers all at one time, almost. Yeah. And Mary, I see you're unmuted. I'll let you go ahead.
I think for me, the excitement that comes to see that a 25-year-old was elected yesterday in the US to serve his country in a way that can make a positive difference. To see the way that people of every generation can contribute to what emerges in the future, I think is really promising. And so while on one hand, I think we see ourselves being very concerned by patterns of anti-democratic process, et cetera, we're seeing a real rise in the way we organize and we do our work that is democratic and participatory. And I'll use again the word regenerative and not exploitive. And I think that for any of us showing up at work tomorrow, my encouragement would be to look for that hopefulness and connect that with the work you're doing tomorrow, next month, next year.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mary. And last but not least, Joe.
Yeah, so I will narrow my comments to Canada, because I think Canada is in a very unique position. In 1946, Canada's population was 12 million. This year it's 39 million. We've tripled our population in the last 70 years, and we are actively pursuing measures to triple this country's population again by 2100. We're targeting 100 million people by 2100. The immigration quotas, the family and early childhood supports are being put in place. The immigrants, the best immigrants from all over the world are coming. And I think we have the strength of institutions to absorb and accommodate that. They will need to change. But I think that this is just teeming with opportunity and possibility. I am very, very bullish on Canada. I think that Canada as a force for good has tremendous potential for the world. And I'm excited about all of the companies, all of the opportunities that all of us here will work together to bring into reality, the new businesses that will be started, the entrepreneurs that will blossom and flourish and grow into small, medium-sized, large, global enterprises. I'm really excited about it all, and powered by this new sense of, like Mary said, awareness, possibility, hope, that the way in which the relationships get structured to power work are changing and changing for the better. So that's what I'm excited about with the future of work.
So that's a lovely, lovely note to end on there. So we have 3 minutes left, and that's all the time we have for our conversation. I just want to thank you to the audience for your amazing questions. A huge thank you to our 3 incredible panelists, Mary, John, and Joe. It was so great hearing and learning really valuable insights from our conversation today. I'm sure you'll probably be getting a few people reaching out to you, hoping to expand their network. And thank you to the audience again for tuning in. I hope you're leaving here with some lessons learned and some great things to think about as you grow and stretch in your careers and the ways they take you. Blueprint Career Services is here to help you along the way. And for more events and workshops and things coming up, please log on to the Blueprint portal as we'll continue to update our calendar. Thank you again for your time, and have an absolutely lovely rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you, Yo-Yo.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.